Welcome to the ArcGIS Pro SDK for .NET Advanced Editing with focus on UI customization. My name is Sean Jones. With me today is Narelle Chesney, and we're both on the editing team in Redlands, California. This topic is going to go over creating construction tools, creating a construction tool with tool options, and then we're going to look at creating a general editing tool, looking at how we use a sketch, how we place it in the Modifier Features pane, and providing a UI for the tool itself. Just to examine these tools in more detail, construction tools are used to create features. They appear under each feature template in the Create Features pane, and they use the sketch that the user draws on the screen to actually create a geometry. So examples of these, if you look under those templates, are line, polygons, trace, and circle construction tools. Editing tools are tools that we use to make edits. They appear either on the ribbon or in the Modifier Features pane itself. And they use the sketch in this case to provide the geometry for an edit operation. So examples are splits, reshapes, and so on. So let's take a look at construction tools to start with. How do we actually create one of these? If you have the SDK installed into Visual Studio, under the language of your choice, you'll have access to a category called ArcGIS, and that contains a whole bunch of predefined templates to enable you to create tools and dock panes and buttons. What we want to reach for here is the ArcGIS Pro construction tool. What that does is it creates a tool file for us, and also it updates the config.daml file. The key thing here is that in the DAML file for the tool, it places an attribute called category ref ID, and this is where, or what determines where this construction tool will show up under what type of template, or what type of template for the layer, for the geometry for the layer. It defaults to Esri editing construction point, which means it'll show up under all the point editing templates. To change that to the type of geometry that you want to create, obviously just change that category ref ID to one of those supported categories, as we can see in the bottom there. In the tool file itself, we also stub out blocks of code. The important thing here is the sketch type of the sketch or the geometry that we'll be creating. Normally it's the same as the category ref ID. It defaults to point as well, and again you need to change this to the type of sketch that you want your user to be creating. Point, line, polygon, and so on. You'll get it through the IntelliSense to see what options there are. The other two options here that are important is it a sketch tool? You say true, which just gives you access to the sketch context menu, and if you want your sketch to snap to things, you would say use snapping equals true as well. The palette placement, when you just use the default category ref ID, it will place the tool, as I said, in the rest of the construction tools for that template. It'll just place it at the end of the group. If you want to place it at a particular location, you can start to use tags within the config.daml. And this one's the content tag, and you can say place with. In this case, I want to place it with an existing tool, so I give the DAML of that existing tool. And then I can say through another tag called insert to say before or after. And here I'm just saying before. So it's going to place my custom tool before the sketch point tool. This is useful if you want to place it with another customization that you have, or you actually do want to place it with an existing construction tool in the templates. Okay, let's turn to Narelle and do a quick demo.
Okay, here I am in Visual Studio, and I have a number of construction tools that I've written that we're going to run through. Here is the first one, which is just a very basic construction tool. And all I've done is, like Sean said, gone into Visual Studio, right-clicked, chosen Add, New Item, and the Visual Studio template picker has popped up, and I've chosen to build a construction tool. So here in my source file, you can see I have the constructor, have the properties set, and then I have my sketch type set to point. This is what the default Visual Studio template gives you. I'm not going to change this right now. All I'm interested in doing is sketching points. I also have an onSketch complete async stubbed out for me, and this is again exactly what the Visual Studio template gives me. It gives me an edit operation, it assigns it a name, it queues up a feature creation using the current template and the sketch geometry, which will be a point, and then it executes the create operation. Over in the DAML file, we have our basic tool. Here, my category ref ID is set to be Esri editing construction point, meaning I'm going to be creating features in a point feature class. I have a caption, I have my class name, I have my images, and then I also have my content. The Visual Studio template also gives us a GUID field by default, and I want to insert my particular construction tool before the Esri sketch tools. So I've added these two tags, the insert before and the place with Esri editing sketch point tool. Now a lot of you might be asking, how do I know what these particular IDs are? Well, over in ArcGIS Pro, if you go to the backstage and go to Options, scroll down to Customize the ribbon, there's this little checkbox here, Show Command IDs on Screen Tips, that I have checked on. Now every time I hover over something in the ribbon, you can see I have the little ID down the bottom on my tooltip. So over here, when I open up my templates for my fire stations, I can see if I hover over this one that I have the Esri editing sketch point tool. And in this particular instance, here's my first basic construction tool, which has been added before the Esri sketch point tool. Now my project here is of the Portland area. I have a couple of polygons and then also a number of fire stations. So all I'm going to do is activate my basic construction tool and go and click a point here to add a new fire station. So again, when I click on Sketch Complete Async is firing because my sketch is of type point. As you can see, my geometry coming into that particular function is a map point. And as we looked at before, all we do is just create an edit operation, assign the name, queue up the feature creation using the current template, which will be a fire station template, and execute the operation. And so all that's going to do is just create me a feature. And when I look at the attributes, you can see I have an object ID. None of the fields were filled out apart from the default template ones because I didn't assign any fields. You can also see that this particular feature class has attachments enabled on it. If I go over to the Attachments tab, you can see that I didn't add any attachments during that particular construction tool. So what I want to do, rather than having my user add attachments afterwards, as part of my construction tool, I want to go ahead and have an attachment added at the same time when I create the feature. So this is my second construction tool, where I'm going to create a feature and add an attachment using the EditOperation chaining paradigm. If you watched our beginning editing session, we discussed how to create a chained operation, but we'll go through this again. Here I go. I activate the second construction tool, click out in the map. If I go back, this is exactly the same. My sketch type is still of type point, and I'm still assigned to a category ref ID of point. So I come in, I have my edit operation. Now in this particular instance, because I'm using the add attachment method, add attachment requires a layer and an OID. But the way create works is you don't retrieve an OID until after the execute has actually occurred. So the create is only actually queuing up the create, it is not actually executing the create. So within my create function, I have the option to have a post-execute action. And this post-execute action is basically saying, when the operation is executed, I want to retrieve the object ID and assign it into this new OID variable. So I have a couple of breakpoints set up here. I have a breakpoint on this post-execute action, and we'll show you that this doesn't actually execute until you're midway within the execute. So here I can go ahead and queue up the create. You can see that my object ID is still -1 at this point. Remember, my feature hasn't been created yet. And when I go and execute, press F5 on this execute, you can see that at some point before my result is assigned and the execute returns, that this post-execute action occurs. And at this point, the OID is coming in for the new feature. So here I have a new OID. My execute has finished and my result has been successful. At this point, I can create a chained operation off of this create, add the attachment using the new object ID, and at this particular point, my attachment is just a hard-coded file, and then go ahead and execute the chained operation. Now when I execute that, because I've chained, I only have one item on the undo stack, despite the fact that I did both a create and an add attachment. And now when I go and look at this new feature, here's my object ID of 34, and I can go over to the attachment tab and I can see that my attachment has been added. This third construction tool is a similar operation. It's going to create a feature and add an attachment, but it's going to do it in a different way from chaining an operation. And the function that we're going to use is just a new overload on add attachment that was added at the 2.4 release. So again, I'm going to click out in my map on sketch complete async, still another map point, come in and we'll do the edit operation. Now instead of using the create function, I'm going to use this create X version. And this returns me a row token. And a row token is a placeholder for an object ID and a global ID pair. Now in this particular scenario, my feature class is not enabled with global IDs, so this is always going to be null. But I do have object IDs because every feature class has an object ID. Now again, this is a similar scenario to what we had before. Again, create X is just queuing up an operation. And at this point, my row token has values of null for both the object ID and the global ID. But I can pass this row token through to a number of different methods. And we added this add attachment overload to take a row handle, which is just a wrapper around a row token, and take the attachment file. So rather than a layer and an object ID, we have this placeholder for the object ID. And we can, if we go ahead and execute, at that point, similar to the way my post-execute action was working in the chain, at this point my object ID has been populated. But within the execute, that object ID, because I had a row token on both the create and the add attachment, when the execute occurs and the object ID is populated in that row token object ID is passed down to the add attachment for me. So again, we go ahead and F5, and when I look at that feature, again, I have the object ID of 35 with my add attachment here. Now, you might be saying that's great, and I've got my attachments added when I'm creating, but I'm not interested in actually doing a hard-coded attachment file. I want my user to choose the attachment that's appropriate for their particular feature when they're creating it. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So Sean will work through those slides first, and then we'll come back and do another demo.
All right, thanks, Nora. Let's take a look at tool options. So if you want the user to enter some options for your construction tool, for example, overriding an attribute or entering a distance for the buffer, as the case is in this example here, you can do that through a tool option UI. The UI is, once it's associated with the tool, is hosted on the active template pane. So on normal feature templates, there's a little blue arrow which points to the right. If you click on that, that goes to the active template pane for that particular template. And then if you've got any custom UI, that'll actually be displayed in that area there, and the user can enter whatever you want them to, essentially. How it's implemented is through an embeddable control, which again is another control that you pick from the SDK template, and we'll get into that in the demo. So the procedure is add an embeddable control from the SDK item template, and Rel gave a good demo of that. I didn't explain that properly before. Register the embedded control in the Esri editing tools options category in the config.daml. You implement the UI, and this is what you want the user to see using standard WPF, normally the MVVM methodology. And then in the view model, you implement iEditing create tool control. And we'll go over that in the next few slides. So add an embeddable control, again from the Visual Studio templates, ArcGIS. In the config file, you then want to update the DAML. Make sure the update category ref ID is set to Esri editing tools options for the embeddable control. And then for the tool itself that you've created, you want to set the tool options ID attribute to the control that you just added. In the view model file itself, you implement iEditing create tool control. This stubs out the initialization methods for the tool, which gives you access to a variable which is passed through called tool options. This is the glue between your UI and the outside world. So this is where the interface, if you like, to store the options that the user would set in the UI and how you would get access to those options that they set through your tool file. In the view model itself, you would then bind the properties in the view model to properties, not properties, but keys, if you like, in the tool options itself, the collection, if you like. So here we just made an example of buffer in the UI, and we're allowing the user to set a buffer distance or a buffer value. And then here in the view model file, we're just setting their tool options, we're giving it a key name, and we're getting the value from a property which is bound to that UI. In tool file itself, we then get access to the tool options by using current template.get tool options. That retrieves that tool options collection for us, and then we can just extract that value that we want from the property in the tool options itself. And then we use that in the sketch on complete async to create a buffer geometry using that value that the user has typed in. Okay, and I'll cross back to Narelle for a demo on that.
Okay, so here I am back in my demo file, and as Sean said, I'm interested in creating a construction tool that has a UI associated with it. So I've gone to my Visual Studio templates and I've added a new construction tool. And then I go back again to my Visual Studio templates and I choose an embeddable control. And this has added an item into my Esri embeddable controls group. But for a construction tool, I actually want my view and view model pair to be registered with the Esri editing tools options. So I've gone and copied and pasted that into a different update category. I'm interested in updating that particular category, and here is my view and view model, my view and my view model, and the ID associated with that particular UI for my attachment. Now this ID I need to copy and paste back up with my construction tool is defined. Again, this is same construction tools as what I had before. I have a category ref ID registered with point feature classes. I have the caption and the class name and the images. I have a tooltip and I have a GUID. Now, rather than positioning this particular construction tool, using the insert and place with options, all I've done at this particular time is just assigned the ID of my embeddable control to the construction tool using the tool options ID attribute. So this is basically joining my construction tool with the embeddable control for my UI. Now over in my C# file for my construction tool, it looks exactly the same as what we had before. I'm still got a constructor, I still have a sketch type of type point, I still have an onSketchComplete async, which basically sets up my edit operation, queues my createX, which is what I used before, giving me a row token. I use the add attachment using the row handle, and then instead of hard coding to a particular file, I'm going to use a property to retrieve my attachment. And that property is basically saying, find me the tool options for this particular construction tool, and I want to retrieve the attachment options name, which I'm going to get to in a minute, for within those particular tool options. And that's going to give me whatever attachment has been decided within the UI. So if we go over and look at the view model for the embeddable control, you can see that here is my class, the attachments options view model. I inherit from embeddable control, and then I also implement the iEditing create tool control interface. If I go down and look at this particular section for the iEditing create tool control, we have a number of different methods and properties that we are important to implement. Here's the first one, the auto open activate template pane. This basically says that whenever the template is activated, or this particular construction tool is activated, I want the active template pane to automatically open. Now, this is what I want because I have a UI and I need the user to choose what the attachment file is. So it makes sense for me to return true to be automatically displaying the UI every time that construction tool is activated. I also have the initialize for active template method, and basically any time that the active template pane shows up, I want to do some initialization. And basically all this is going to do is take the tool options that's coming in, assign it to my internal variable, and then do some initialization. And I've got some breakpoints set up, and so when I go back to ArcGIS Pro, we'll see these breakpoints go off, and we'll walk through these a little bit more. I also return true because I want this UI to again show up in the active template. I have initialize for template properties. Now this is where if you right click on a template and choose the properties context menu, this is where this method gets called. In this particular scenario, for this demo, I don't want to show this UI, so I'm going to go ahead and return false. So let's just jump out to Pro, and here I am again, same project. I'm going to go and activate this construction tool, the construction tool with attachment with a UI. And when I activate it, you can see that my initialize for active template method has fired. Again, I mentioned we'll come in, we get some options coming from the construction tool, assign that to my internal variable, and we can go ahead and initialize some options. And all I'm interested in doing is finding out what the current attachment option is so that I can assign it to my internal variable. So do I have an attachment within my tool options? At this point, no. So I'm going to hard code to my fire station. I'm going to add that particular attachment into my tool options, and then I'm going to notify the underlying tool that some attachment and tool options have changed. So here's my UI, and really all it is just a text block with a button that's going to launch up a open file dialog so I can go browse to different types of attachments. And when I choose a different attachment and go OK, you can see that that particular text block binds to an attachment property in my view. And so all I'm doing here, once the new value comes in of Fire Station 2, I can go ahead and set some internal variables, update the tool options with the new value, and again notify the background tool that my options have changed. So now when I go and sketch my point for a new fire station, over here add attachment is going to come and choose, knows that because I'm on the current template and I've got the tool options, I'm going to read the attachment from the tool options. It's going to be Fire Station 2, and I can add that attachment, execute that operation, and when I go and look at that particular feature, you can see that I have a different attachment than the first one. Sean, back to you.
Thanks, Naram. Okay, let's take a look at editing tools now. How would you build just a generic editing tool that uses the sketch? Simply, these are tools that you create again by the SDK. In this case, you would pick a map tool. And when you do that, you get the stubs filled out for you, and it's automatically hosted on the ribbon in the add-ins tab on the top there. The user would then use the sketch to create a geometry, and then you would use that geometry inside an edit operation to actually perform an edit, whether it be a create or a reshape or whatever. You can also host the tool inside the Modify Features doc pane, much like the rest of the core editing tools. And that's also configured by the config.daml file as well. And we'll go through those over the next few slides. So when I create an editing tool, in the config.daml that's created for me, I get the tool appearing, of course. If I do want it to appear in the Modify Features pane, I can simply say add another attribute called category ref ID and set that to Esri editing command list, and that'll just make sure it appears in the Modify Features pane. Where it actually appears under which group is defined by the content tag and the L_group attribute. And here I'm just saying pro SDK samples. This will create a new group for me if it doesn't already exist, or if you specify an existing group, then it'll place your tool into that existing group. The L_, by the way, means it's localizable. So if you're worried about the language used there. By default, if you add a tool to the Modify Features pane, it's automatically added to the gallery at the top of the edit ribbon. You can specify if you want this tool to appear in the favorites list, which usually means it appears in the top bar there, so it appears on the gallery as the first row. And to do this, again, you use that content tag, but here you can set another attribute called gallery 2D or gallery 3D, so true or false. We have a separate gallery for 2D views, a separate gallery for 3D views, and so you just say there if you want it to appear in the favorites or not. Embedding a UI to the Modify Features pane. So a lot of our core tools switch out the Modify Features pane for their own UI. So if you take a look at things like Clip or Buffer or some of the others, they have a different UI which enables you to choose options and set values and so on. So you can do this for your custom tools as well. The procedure is fairly similar to tool options, but slightly different in a number of ways. The map tool class itself has a number of properties for specifying these UI controls. And one of them is control ID, and the other one is embeddable control property, which retrieves the view model for the embedded control that you created. And Narelle will show this during the demo, but we'll talk about it here as well. So again, the concept is when you want to add a custom UI for your control, add an embeddable control through the templates in the add-ins. This creates an embeddable controls category in the config.daml that's created for you, as we saw in the last demo. In the tool file itself, you then need to set the control ID property for the tool to the embeddable control that you created. This is what tells your tool what UI it's actually using. In the view model for the embeddable control, this is where you set, this is in the tool itself, not the view model. So in the tool itself, you would then make a reference to the embeddable control that you have, and then usually cast that to the name of the control. You can then get access to the view model properties simply by using the reference variable. And normally these are bound properties as well, so they're obviously reflecting what's happening in the UI for that control. We threw in this slide because it's new at 2.5, and Narelle's also going to kind of highlight it during the demo. We have a better way to create relationships between two rows, usually a feature class and maybe an associated table. Previously, you would have done this by using the core data API, but now we've moved this or made an additional operation, the edit operation, to make it easier. If you like, again, this isn't creating the relationship, it's just creating that association between two rows. So in the example here, I have an existing parcel in the map and I want to create a new owner row in the table, and I want to make an association or a relationship between them. So you can see that I'm looking for the parcel owner's relationship class. I'm getting what's called a row handle for the selected parcel in the map. I'm then creating a new row in the owners table using this createEx method, which we haven't seen before. Showed it in the attachments demo, which also returns a token which I can then turn into a row handle, and then I create a new relationship description, which I'm going to use as the parameter for the edit operation create, That takes the relationship class that I found from the geodatabase, a origin row handle, which is the parcel's destination row handle, which is the owner table record that I will create, and then I simply create that relationship through an edit operation and then execute it. Okay, over to Narelle again, who's going to show all this lovely stuff.
Thanks, Sean. So here I am, still in the same project, still with my fire stations in Portland. And in addition to having attachments registered with that particular feature class, I also have a relationship between that feature class and an attribute table. And the attribute table is basically saying what type of services the fire stations will provide. So here's my table, a fire services table. I have 3 different types of services, 3 records here. One is hazardous materials, one is a technical rescue, and one is ambulance services. So if I go and select a particular fire station and look out at its attributes, you can see that I have the relationships shined up in the attributes pane, and this particular fire station will provide all 3 services because of the relationship. This particular fire station will only have the ambulance services at that particular location. So what I'm interested in doing is creating a modify tool where my user can go ahead and select fire stations and have relationship records assigned to them. So let's go and see the first basic one here over in the modify pane. I have 2 tools. One is the basic one, and then one which has a UI registered with it. If I go ahead and go back to Visual Studio, you can see here is the .daml entry for my basic. It has an ID, a caption, and a class name. It has a category ref ID, which I've added to make sure that it appears in the modify pane. Esri editing command list is the key string that you need to make sure that it appears in the modify features pane. And in addition, I've also said I want to have a group, and my group is my custom group. I also want the tool to appear in the favorites on a 2D map. I'm not interested in having it appear in the favorites for a 3D map. And I also want to use the same attributes that we had with construction tools earlier, where I can position my particular tool. By default, they always end up at the bottom, and I don't like scrolling that particular pane, so I want to make sure my tools end up before any of the cost tools. So again, I can use the insert and place with attributes to say I want my tool to be before the Esri editing vertices move tool. Again, if I go over here and I hover over the move tool, you can see that that's the Esri editing edit vertices move. And this is my basic construction tool. So that's all we have there in the demo file. If we go over to the basic tool, again, I've just used the Visual Studio template. I've said I want to be a map tool. It's given me a constructor by default. I haven't changed anything there. It gives me an on tool activate async by default. I haven't changed anything there. And it stubs me out an on sketch complete. And this is where I've written most of the code that we need. So let's just go ahead and activate this particular tool. I'm going to head and sketch out around this particular fire station. And because I was a sketch type of type rectangle, my on sketch complete async comes in, becomes a polygon envelope. And what I'm interested in doing is finding the features, the fire station features that are underneath that particular rectangle. So we can go ahead and do that by using the map view active get features method. I'm interested in only finding the features from the fire station layer, so I can go and filter that feature set by determining ones which are from the fire stations layer. And I can retrieve all the object IDs from that particular set using this key and value pair. So here I can see that I only selected one particular object ID. From there, I'm going to make sure that my relationship table is in the map. And then using that particular table, I need to get the geodatabase data store so that I can open the relationship between the two. So here, again, I've retrieved the table, get the data store, and then use that data store, which is actually the geodatabase, to open the relationship class. And I need the relationship class to be able to add the relationship record. So here I go, edit, create my edit operation, give it a name. I want to find all of the related records that are already associated with that particular fire station because I don't want to double up. I want to delete all of those records. And then I'm going to create a new row handle to my fire station record. Because this is the basic modifier tool, right now I'm just hard coding, and so this particular fire station is only going to have a hazardous materials service. So create a row handle to that particular fire service record. And then for each of my fire stations which I identified with the tool, I want to create a row handle to that particular record, and then add a relationship descriptor using the relationship class, my source handle, and my destination handle. My source handle is my fire station feature. My destination handle is the fire service record. And then I can queue up the create of that relationship record using another one of our overloads on the create method. And I'll just loop around until I've executed that for each of the fire stations I identified. Now I only identified one station, so I'm just going to jump right out and execute the operation. And so now when I go ahead and look at that particular fire station that was identified, which was this one, you can see that I only have a hazardous materials related record on that particular feature. Now, if I go back over to my modifier pane, we're going to look at how I can use a UI so that my users can actually select what appropriate record they want to get added into the relationship. So again, if we jump back to Visual Studio, I can look at my config.daml file. I have a new tool here, the Add Relationship UI. Again, category ref ID has been set to Esri editing command list. I want it to appear in the modify features. It's in the My Custom group. I want it to be in the gallery for favorites. Now the other part that we needed with the tool was an embeddable control. So again, I've gone and added an embeddable control. By default, it gets added to the Esri embeddable controls. Modified tools are a little different from construction tools. They stay in the Esri embeddable controls up category. So again, I have an ID, a view, and a view model. But where does the connection between that tool and the category and the embeddable control appear? Well, it actually appears in the source code rather than the DAML file like it did with the construction tool. So over here in my constructor for my map tool, I have my ID of the embeddable control assigned to the control ID. And that's how we build that connection between the tool and the embedded UI. And in my onSketch complete async, I can retrieve that embeddable control using this particular method. An embeddable control property, I can cast it to the class that I have for the view model, and then I can access a property on that particular view model to retrieve what type of services I'm going to have, rather than hard coding it to the particular hazardous materials that I did in the previous tool. If we go out and look at the view model, again, it's just a view model, it's just a class, it inherits from embeddable control. There's no additional interfaces to implement like there was with the construction tools. And the first thing I'm going to do in my constructor is basically go off and get the data for that related table. And if we look at the get data, let me just put a breakpoint there and run this tool. You can see that all I'm doing is finding the fire service table in the map, jumping to the background thread because I'm using the geodatabase API, And all I'm going to do is go ahead and search that table using a null query filter, meaning I'm going to retrieve all the records in the table. And I'm just going to add a new particular class, which is just really an object ID and the service name and a isSelected value for each of the records in that table. So I'm just going to loop through the row cursor and retrieve all of those and add that particular new service item class into my dictionary. Now, the service item class is just something that I've created internally. Just has an OID, a service name, and an isSelected. And those particular values, when I've populated them, they just link into a list view that I've shown up here on the UI. So as I go and select one or more of these items and select my fire station, over in my map tool, again, I'll come through, I'll get my features, I find all the ones that are fire stations, find my fire station record, and again, go back out to my embeddable control, retrieve the ones that are selected. You can see I only have two selected, one of object ID 1 and object ID 3. I don't need to retrieve the entire record with the name because the only things that my row handles are interested in are object IDs. And then we just continue doing what we did with the basic one. We get the fire station layer, we get the data store, we open the relationship class, create the edit operation, assign a name, find all of the related records for those selected object IDs, delete the existing relationships, and then go ahead and loop through all of the fire stations, create a source handle, loop through all of the selected services, create a destination handle, create a relationship description, queue the create of the relationship record. Now remember, I selected two services, so I've got the second one coming through now, queuing up another relationship record create, and then execute the operation. Oh, well, that's interesting. Why did that fail? Let's try that again. Oops. I'm not sure why that failed, but let's just have a look at this particular record. Come on. Anyway, you can see that second time around, always the charm, rather than the first time, but we've got two new related records added. Back to Sean.
Good, thank you. Okay, so in summary, things are always better the second time around. So we went through in this session creating a construction tool with tool options, and then we took a look at just creating a regular edit tool with some advanced concepts there of providing a UI, place it on the modify features pane with its own UI, and also some relationship operations there as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on GeoNet on the SDK content page there. These sessions for the SDK team are also being made available on the GitHub, on the Esri GitHub. There's a little QR code there, or you can just go to the actual URL link there as well.
And you'll get all the source code.
And you'll get
the slides.
You'll get all the source code that we've used during the demos.
And the project.
All the slides. Thank you very much.